I won't
that
tell
you're
him.
stuck with.
I said I won't tell him.
The other tires.
I won't tell him.
So I must be at
Oh,
I didn't see anything.
people do that all the time.
I didn't see anything.
Oh, okay, well, come have a bagel.
Okay.
When he died, I had a shed full of stuff like that.
That's,
Well, now we covered snow and winter, you know, where the hardy source, right? You got it.
double times.
I wonder how many people would actually be here today.
Well, Jackie
Jackie
pooped out. No, she said she's gonna sleep in. And I called Flo and asked her if she wanted a ride. And because I said, I'm coming by your house.
And she said, she's not coming.
And she said, no, she wants to go grocery shopping afterwards.
Oh,
So she's coming.
Oh,
But Maud's here, a hardy sort, good. It wasn't so horrible.
Yeah.
It was starting to snow. Wasn't so horrible. So, I texted Flo this morning and said, we missed you last night. If you're coming to Torah Study, we haven't picked you up. You know, I'm coming right by.
totally aware of.
She said, yeah, I'm gonna go to the grocery store afterwards, but I'll see it. So, so she's thinking she's not here, so.
Are you gonna study there?
there's
that's the goal. Studying.
Good morning.
You'll be able
How are
to.
you?
You'll be able to.
She's pensive, that's
A
why
little of everything, right?
What?
Candy was being pensive. Thank you.
Like company, but
I didn't interrupt you, you were thinking, so good morning.
You were being pensive. Hi, Mom.
Yes.
you're good. I
I'll
enjoy
see her
talking
because
to
you're
you.
just, you know, texting.
Where'd you go to school?
Fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Just
when
enjoy.
Time's up.
did you go to college?
What's that work for me?
Just
I can all
Your job is to finish the children.
It's just, I have a few things I like to do.
You know what you're doing, then no.
When they happen.
And college wouldn't have done it anyway.
And if I plan right.
It would have helped,
In
but
advance,
I,
it's always too much for this late.
No, I got you.
trust them.
And I want to say,
So you learn on your own.
but I guess in cars and everything, except that I think that she lies in her life.
We're okay.
Jim and I are.
He wants you to, you need to find somebody else.
Yeah.
I tell you to.
It- I mean,
Good morning, good morning.
Or is
I
it?
have
We
time,
don't have Knox
I
today.
have to tell her so specifically exactly what to do.
What's new in your world?
She can get hours. She doesn't know what to do. I'm worried that I could be involved in it too. She's,
Here, I put them over.
yeah, she's just a good person. She doesn't make money well. She's got grandchildren.
Today.
No. No, she's a poor person. I found her.
I have to go by you first.
Check the creek.
Well, you know, I was thinking about doing that
Is
too.
it Goldie?
My other purse
Last week.
four,
Last week.
and it's not.
Oh, this is cute.
You need another one?
No, I got one. I grabbed two.
It's, oh, I like it.
These are my
Thank
It's
you.
got spirit. I
So
know.
little.
They're lovely. It's so sweet. Don't you look at pictures of them?
When they were little.
They're all grown up now.
I know they would be. But I don't have another purse that I can shove a lot of stuff in, but I don't like this.
Well, this is my grandson, my.
Good morning, Jim.
You already did.
It's no problem. Hey.
I'd shake your hand, but I just got
I
babies on
love
my
Flo.
hand.
And I texted her.
I'd shake your hand,
She
but I
was
just
here
got
this
babies on my
morning.
hand. So,
And I said, we missed
hello.
you last night.
Nice to meet you.
How
are you?
I'll pick you up if you want on the
Nice that you
Torah
came.
Study. And she said, I said, are you going to Torah
Oh,
Study?
you can?
And she said, yes, she's coming.
It's for the babies, of course.
So I said, okay.
Whatever feast.
Ah, there he is.
I just go slow, I don't know what it is. No, it isn't.
Where did that come
Well, last night it wouldn't stop snowing. Because when I left the house last night, the guy had just bought the drive. When I got back, I had a heck of a time getting in. Because he didn't quit home. All right. Otherwise, it's hard to have it.
Last Thursday, I left out, she was coming. Last Thursday, good morning. When I changed appointments.
You can see from
I'm not looking for a big
I'll see where it's not here.
They weren't here. There's Katia.
I happened to see him yesterday. Didn't see
Yeah,
him.
but they're all grown up now.
Office building.
So, you know where we should go for, to look for?
Well, yeah.
Is he good?
Oh, yeah.
For
Yes.
Where is he?
is,
In Willoughby, that next to Lake County West, it was actually attached.
the store.
It's on Miller Avenue, which is the extension of Euclid Avenue.
So he's not affiliated with nothing. Like this,
Well, that's University Hospital.
Oh, it is.
It's an actual hospital, and next to it is the office building. We're here.
They have purses, and I shopped around in there.
Lake County West. It's University Hospital.
I don't know how long they have.
306, 306 says,
Just need something that has lots of.
So if I were,
There's no
90, you're right,
And
91.
if I were trying to get there, how would I go?
And I don't like
Well,
things.
I just go 271, get off
Because
the
they
they
thing,
fall off the cars.
go north,
Everything falls out.
which is Euclid, turn right, and you'll see it.
Still got to fix it.
It's pretty big.
Well, I cleaned my
You
purse
can't,
out.
you
and
could,
stopped
you
carrying
could,
it.
but it will be,
And I.
it's a huge building, and his office building is attached to it.
And I
It
figured
looks
out,
like one building.
Yeah.
It
I
is.
get one room with just that. It's usually
And I'm getting coffee and.
Sounds like it.
yeah, me too.
Sounds pretty
What's that?
Sounds pretty direct.
But when you get off at 101, it's a fair piece north.
Oh,
It's not immediate.
he sounded like we took it off and there it is.
Well, you get off at 91.
Just wasn't my work.
She works in
Yeah.
She works in.
Morning, how are you?
this one.
Went well. I understand you guys be here. 40, 45 people. Yeah. It's going to be up.
Yeah.
You got pulled over?
They took it away from me.
Yeah.
And I said,
Takes that, just-
Yeah, you could. You might.
You could, if you really wanted to.
well, anybody who believes
Yeah.
Right. They took it away and I said, well, if you're gonna
But
take it away,
did he get away with our
give it to somebody.
Yeah.
You know,
Please, and I was, yeah, put it in my carry-on.
Her shampoo.
oh, where so he's going to go back to it.
Well, apparently, I think
talked about it.
I would say
Oh, nice.
it's the
Oh, so this is.
I know.
I like it.
Yeah, I know, I don't do that. As a matter of fact, if I'm going to the president of the house,
I'll shampoo that my wife put in my carrier.
And my
Is
education.
Oh, that happened twice.
He wasn't right.
Yeah. You wanna take it back? How's that going? How's it make? He said, I'm sorry, I got it rolled up. So I'll take it home. Change it.
Were you?
Yeah, well, I get the board.
I noticed
You
that
don't
you were
do it.
gone. I didn't know when. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
You just take care
I guess I would have thought push through the fatigue so you can get stronger. How about you? Good morning, everybody.
I think I scared them away from
Or maybe they just knew you weren't going to be doing it this week.
I think I scared them away from this.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I think the storm and the cold has had an impact. Last night, as you probably know, some of you were here, that we had an exchange of clergy. So that Rabbi Dadun and I were at Fairmont with Rabbi Caruso and Cantor Lappin. And
He had a gorgeous voice.
he has a wonderful voice. Rabbi Nosenchuk and Molban was here with Cantor Sibo. And we were very concerned about 3 o'clock about the weather. Should we cancel? No, we really can't do that. Should we just go to live stream or to Zoom? And we finally decided just to plow through and have it. But there were smaller crowds last night. We had about 40 at Fairmont, 45, and I understand you had about the same number here. But and I think the weather has probably had an impact on this morning too, and here comes the snow again. The roads are clear though. Anyway, exciting times in both the temples, Fairmont and here. The merger, I think, is going to go through. There will be some official communication sometime in February about this. There's still votes to be taken, but I think we are on our way. But I do, welcome to those who are live streaming. So glad to have everybody with us. Thanks to Ron Rosenfield for leading our discussion last week. I say this over and over again over the years, but it's always true that it's just a thrill for me when I'm away, need to be away or want to be away, when I can call on somebody in the group. Not everybody says yes when I ask. I certainly don't put any pressure on anybody, but when people say yes and then come and lead a session that I hear has been really great, it's a thrill for me. I mean, I love to conduct Torah study and do what I do, but one of the goals of an enterprise like this is, and certainly ought to be, a sense of collaboration. It may be true that I've spent a little more time on Torah than you guys have, but that you can take on the challenge and prepare something and lead a discussion is exactly what ought to be one of the goals of this kind of enterprise. you shouldn't have to rely on the so-called expert, doesn't think of himself as an expert, but one who aspires to being one, but that you guys can step forward and lead a discussion. I just think it's one of the highlights of our enterprise over the years. So I may be asking some of you to do it again before too long. You'll say yes, you'll say no. I can always find somebody. So, Ron, thanks again. I was able, from where I was, to tune in only for about 5-7 minutes and saw Ron declaiming about the plagues and then calling on somebody with a question. So the mode of our conversation continued last week. Some presentation, some conversation, which I think is great. Okay, so let's continue with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so we are going to look at long last, the story of Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth as an example of a friendship, and it's undoubtedly the paradigm example of a friendship. David and Jonathan, we thought about a little bit, and certainly there's some friendship elements there, but it's not maybe a truly reciprocal.
We need credits.
I'm sorry?
Whatever credits you announce every week.
Who gets credits?
Whoever brought the bagels.
Oh, the bagels, yeah. Well, there must be a reason why I didn't do it, because I forgot to write it down. Ron, I think you picked up the bagels, didn't you?
I picked up.
Yeah, very good, thank you. Who knows? You sign up, somebody, what? What's that? What? Vivian?
And Vivian
What?
provided the bagels.
We did?
Oh, thank you so much. It says that over there?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Who does it say sponsored the live stream? Vivian and Malcolm sponsored the bagels. Thank you.
Susan Hannah.
Who?
Susan Hannah.
Susan Hannah. Very good. Susan, many years ago, moved to Columbus, I think, to be with her daughter, but she continues to live stream. Susan, if you're looking in, thank you so very much. And she sponsors things from time to time, as do other people who, Brian Berman, you remember Dr. Brian Berman, who moved, I think, to Detroit, didn't he? Many years ago, but maintains contact. I'm in touch with him often, and when he comes to town, we get together, and he tunes into Torah Study and sometimes writes questions or comments to me. So we have an enterprise that expands beyond Cuyahoga County. Could be better than that. Okay, so we're looking at Ruth. When we finish with Ruth and Naomi, we'll turn to our next topic, which I think, I'm not 100% certain, will be parents and children. The Torah's view about the relationship between parents and children, and by extension, grandparents and grandchildren. I don't think the Tanakh deals with it frontally, but the rabbinic tradition does take up that question of the relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. So I think we'll have some fun with that. Not only are there many examples in the books of the Bible that we've been reading over the years, but there's a lot that the book of Proverbs has to say about it. And I think in all the years we've been together, we've never looked at the book of Proverbs. So these are admonitions for how to live life. And aside from some of the more narrative expressions of this relationship, the V'ahavta, which comes in the middle of Deuteronomy, we'll want to look at Proverbs to see what that book has to say about it. So it's one of the bonuses of doing parents and children. We get to look at a book that we have not looked at before. So I want to remind us about the definitions of friendship that we are using as a kind of basis for this. So friendship, this is just from those sheets that we looked at several weeks ago, is a distinctively personal relationship that is grounded in, and now I label 1, 2, and 3, the 3 aspects of friendship according to this definition. Friendship is a distinctly personal relationship that is grounded in 1, a concern on the part of each friend for the welfare of the other, 2, for the other's sake. That is, I don't care about your welfare so that it'll come back to benefit me. I care about your welfare for your sake and not for my sake. And that involves a degree of intimacy. Let me read that again. Friendship is a distinctly personal relationship that is grounded in a concern on the part of each friend for the welfare of the other, for the other's sake, and that involves some degree of intimacy. I want to say something about number 2, for the other's sake. One might think that this is a way of understanding the distinction between egoism and altruism. If I'm doing something for the other's sake, I don't have any ego involvement. It's not about me. I resist that understanding of altruism. I see no incompatibility between caring about somebody else for their own sake while also getting something for myself. To care only about the other and not anything, it strikes me as too severe. Why can't I also get some benefit from, not from the relationship, which by definition has to be mutual, but by caring about you? So, love your neighbor as yourself is how I interpret that is, yes, I should love my neighbor, but I'm also obligated to love myself. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So there, one can think of both and rather than either or. I would go a step further with that idea. I can hardly love my neighbor until I love myself. If I don't have respect for myself, it's hard for me genuinely to love somebody else because I remain needy and not the sense of well-being that self-love creates. I've often thought about that, or often did during my years of raising my children. You know, if the parent is satisfied in his or her life, it's much easier to care about somebody else because you're not looking to them for the gratification that you don't have. If the parent is super needy, then the children can be used to gratify the kids. I'll give you an example from my own life where I think I failed at that. I've said this before, but it's one of the great moments of my life. My son Danny was a great tennis player, and we used to travel a little bit. And one summer he qualified for a tournament in Muncie, Indiana. So we drive to Muncie. Could have been St. Louis. I think it was Muncie. And I have a folding chair and I have a book. And I'm sitting maybe 30 feet away from the court, behind the court, and I can watch the match. And I'm watching, and I'm reading, and I think I'm calm. I don't have a great stake in what happens in that match, and I'm watching, and I'm reading, and, you know, Danny is playing well, and he's also missing some easy shots. At one point, my calm is broken when he turns to me and says, "Dad, will you stop it?" So evidently, though I think I'm calm, I am giving off anxiety signals. Maybe it's the way I'm sitting. Maybe it looks a little too rigid. Maybe I'm looking up too much. And what does that mean if he was right? And I probably was. I was not only rooting for him, I had some very powerful needs of my own. That my son should do well, of course that's fine, but in addition, doing well that also made me feel a little more comfortable and better. I needed to live vicariously through his success. And if he wasn't successful, maybe my own well-being would have been compromised. I thought of that as an example of a parent living through the activities, the successes and failures of his or her children. Jordan?
Under altruism, I was thinking of Maimonides' levels of charity.
Yes.
Because you can think of altruism of not within families or friends, but with giving. And with all the levels, I don't remember any of them that was self-reflective.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, one can infer from altruism, from giving, that one gains something, especially if the gifts are acknowledged in some publication, or if the giver gets something back. Yeah, but I don't remember all of Maimonides' levels, but I think you're right about that. Malcolm?
Roger, along that same line, it seems to me that to the extent that every action by an individual is volitional, then even what we describe as altruism has some value to the giver, to me,
Right.
to the one. Because I make a decision, even if it's anonymous, even if it's unrecognized, there's something that, to the extent that I have a choice to make to do something or not do something, there's something that drives me and satisfies some need to me to have taken that action.
So that's a good point. So Malcolm is saying that ipso facto, by the very fact of the doing, the willing of giving something to another, I am gaining satisfaction. But I think there's a difference between the satisfaction that an act gives me and the satisfaction that comes back to me from the one to whom I'm giving something. To me, that's the more important component here. And that is, am I doing something for you in order that something come back to me? Or is this just a pure act of giving? So I'm not sure that the act itself and the gratification I can get from, say, either willing something or willing something good, I think is less important in this question than when I bring something to your door, am I looking for a big thank you? Or am I looking for putting you in my debt in some way or another? So I don't know. But I really like this doing it for the other's sake is good as long as it doesn't imply and getting nothing in return. The relationship can be, I want to give Jim something. I'm doing something for his sake. But if Jim says thank you or Jim calls me the next day, that's fine because I'm getting something as well as doing it for him. My motive is not to do it for myself through him, but doing it for him. Okay, so let me go on with a little more Aristotle here. A main piece of Aristotle's definition of a true friend are the qualities that the friend possesses. In his writing, Aristotle focuses on the virtue. Let's think of a virtue here as a way of enhancing human well-being. on the way to some sort of human perfection, always on the way. In his writing, Aristotle focuses on the virtue of the two people in the friendship, as he says, but the complete sort of friendship, and you may remember that Aristotle divides friendship into three components: friendships of pleasure, friendships of usefulness, and virtue friendships. Here, when he talks about a complete sort of friendship, he's talking about virtue friendships, which certainly can contain components of usefulness and pleasure, but their primary aspect is helping one another to grow. In his writing, Aristotle focuses on the virtue of the two people in the friendship, as he says, and here's a quote, but the complete sort of friendship is that between people who are good and alike in virtue, since they wish for good things for one another in the same way insofar as they are good and they are good in themselves. I wish for your goodness, and I am trying in this relationship also to be good myself. So the defining part of Aristotle's view of true friendship is that it can only be between two virtuous, or I might add virtue-seeking individuals. Okay? So for Aristotle, the true friendship is a way of trying to elevate the humanity, not in just a descriptive sense, I'm a human being, but in the normative sense, being a good human being, really a human being, right? Isn't that philosophy teacher really a philosopher? That sort of thing. So for Aristotle, a friendship elevates the individuals toward more and more virtue and goodness. So those are some of our working definitions. Let's turn to the book of Ruth. When you get the page, call it out. 1319. 1419. Wonder what happened in 1419. Very good, very good. There certainly was no baseball then. I think we get, well, that's an example of what you're saying. Okay, so let me just read maybe 5 verses and then we'll go back and talk about it. In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi. His 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Machlon and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. Okay. 5 quick sentences. And look how dense, how packed they are with information. And I say this because it points to the literary quality of the narrative, of the story. And I suggest that the literary quality is not to be separated from the quality of the content, but in a way points to it. Because an author who knows what he or she is up to from the beginning, as displayed by the literary craft, also may be expected to know what he or she is doing in terms of the content. So we've already looked a little bit at this first verse. In the days when the judges judge. So this points back to that period before the monarchy, about which we read in the book of Judges, And remember, a biblical judge is not a juridical office, but a military one. The shofet in the book of Shoftim, Judges, is called on an occasion when a military victory is necessary. This person rises, is called by God, rises, vanquishes the enemy, leaves the scene. So that describes what the judge is, but it also points to a certain kind of social organization. The judge is temporary. There's no dynastic implication there at all. So the judge is essentially a weak office to be strong only when called upon to vanquish an enemy, with the assumption that once the defeat happens, the judge leaves the scene. So we might say that judgeship is much more conducive to monotheism than is dynasty, because dynasty has a kind of permanence to it, which elevates whoever is sitting on the throne, and the higher the human being, the more one might come to feel that that human being can supply everything we need, eclipsing the role of God. Okay? So there's something monotheistic about judges, even though it was a calamitous era. And because the very weakness of the leader led to continual vulnerability. Until, as we remember in the next book of the Bible, in 1 Samuel, the people clamor for a king. We want to be like all the other people. And it's not only we want to be like them, but now the people are more and more sedentary. They're living among other peoples. They see what other peoples have, usually armies. They're more vulnerable militarily, and they need a more stable kind of political leadership. So that the book of Judges can be understood as a warning about a society which doesn't have stable leadership. The problem with stable leadership, as God says when the people ask for a king, is they might be rejecting me. I'm their king. So on. So we start with the book of Judges, with the judges. And as I pointed out, the very last word in the book of Ruth is David. So one can understand this book in one of its facets as a movement from one notion of leadership to another, and is in some way the story of David. David's patrimony is exalted because his great-grandmother is one of the key heroes of biblical literature. In my view, the greatest person in biblical literature, even out-Abrahaming Abraham. Right? Abraham is called by God to go to another land. Ruth is not called by anybody. She does this on her own. Abraham is promised, I will make you a great nation, and all the nations shall bless themselves through you. A kind of set of rewards for what he is doing. Ruth is offered no reward. So that, I like to say, that Ruth is Abraham purified. And if that's the case, then David has a background to brag about, or at least we might think that he carries some of the virtues of his ancestors, okay? So one of the plot devices, or one of the plots of this book, is the elevation of David. And as I pointed out the last time we talked about this, we could go back to earlier stories, the daughters of Lot and Judah and Tamar, who are ancestors of David, also to point out some of their virtues, and also an idea that I especially love, the low probability of ever getting to David. I mean, the daughters of Lot had to have performed incest in order to make David possible, right? God works in mysterious ways. Or to put it differently, human beings sometimes have to take actions which are problematic in order to solve the problems that they are confronted with. Like Jacob. What if Jacob had not bargained away Esau's birthright? What if Jacob had said, yeah, I'll give you a bowl of soup, Gesundheit, enjoy it. And Esau would have been left with the birthright, namely with the obligation to carry on the covenant. What are the chances that a guy whose primary need is to fill his belly is going to face the problems that carrying on the covenant is going to confront? It has to be Jacob. And Jacob knows that, I'm saying. And Rebekah certainly knows it. She knows who the stronger son is. Not the better, but the one more fit for this task. And she conspires in ways that cause us to criticize her and to criticize Jacob. What would have happened had they only done actions in the category of the common virtues and not extended themselves to do something problematic but necessary? No. I'm sorry?
There be no Torah.
There it is. So, I think the Torah does challenge us to recognize that one of the imperatives that we all face are the challenges of our day, and what is it going to take to do to meet them and succeed over and against those challenges, which is not always to do the conventional moral thing. Anyway, let's go back. So in the days when the judges judged, by the way, we have here in the first verse 2 words, vayehi, and it came to pass. It's one of the ways of starting a sentence. So if I translate this verse literally, and it came to pass in the days when the judges judged, and it came to pass that there was a famine in the land, one commentator suggests there's a redundancy here of and it came to pass. The verse could have started very easily, and it came to pass that there was a famine in the land, which then lays the foundation for the narrative that follows. And this commentator makes an interesting point just from syntax, that since the first and it came to pass clause is redundant, to have included it is motivated by the need to point something out. And the thing that needed to be pointed out was the first part of what we call an envelope structure. That a phrase at the beginning and a phrase at the end, the same phrase, encloses a literary unit. And without that, in the days when the judges judged, we could not see that David represents a movement from one kind of social organization to another. And therefore, its very redundancy in the hands of an adept author points to something that is required here, and that is to show us one narrative, one kind of narrative arc in this particular book. I like that very much. In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land, okay? Privation. Something is not gone right, okay? Notice, let's see if I can find it quickly. Verse 22, the very last verse of chapter 1. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So the famine with which the chapter opens is now gone, and we have the onset of plenty. The question might be, what are the kind of what is the range of meanings for the word famine, for the idea of famine? Certainly, one idea is the plain meaning. It was a famine, there wasn't enough food, and at the end, the famine is solved by the onset of the barley harvest. We could also think, though, of what we might call a spiritual or social famine, which is solved not by something like the barley harvest, but by something else. So is the author pointing to not only a fact about the natural world, but about something that human beings themselves contribute to in order to end a certain kind of famine? Okay? So, notice, by the way, in the first half of the first verse, we already have an astonishing amount of richness and depth. The author is pointing to time of the judges, which then will be transformed into something else. And the author has introduced the notion of famine. The innocent reader, the first-time reader, thinks he or she knows exactly what is being referred to by referring to famine. And that's reinforced by the barley harvest at the end. But another idea is going to spring upon us. Yeah, Ron?
Is one to assume that the famine had now spread to Moab? Because we're given no other reason for Ruth to want to leave other than 1:8. She says, may the Lord be wrong quote, sorry. 1:6. She had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. The end of the famine at that point. But still there's no reason why she's leaving Moab, where apparently she'd been happy for many years. Her daughters-in-law were Moabites. She apparently had been well accepted in the Moabian community. We don't know why she's leaving.
Okay, so that's...
There's now a famine that has spread to Moab.
Good. I like that comment. So Ron is wondering why it is she left. And one reason, now given that famine has become a theme, is that maybe the famine that has strangled Bethlehem, Israel, has also spread to or been part of Moab. And her reason for leaving is parallel to the reason for, at the beginning, Elimelech and Naomi and sons leave Bethlehem. They leave Bethlehem to go to Moab because of famine. In like manner, Ruth leaves Moab because of a famine to go to a place of plenty. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be true. I think we're going to see that there's another reason for Ruth's leaving, but just because A is true doesn't mean B is false. So I think we've put on the table, Ron, another factor. And we're just going to have to see, because in a way, depending upon how powerful A is, another motivation for Ruth, the more powerful that motivation, the less powerful the other motivation. So this gives us a way of testing how strong motivation A, what the story indicates Ruth's reason is, how powerful is it, and therefore how important might it be to speculate that there was also a famine in Moab. Jim?
Well, you can do it any way you want, but Naomi's telling the daughters-in-laws to go back.
Right.
And if she was aware of the famine, I don't think she would do that.
Okay.
So it supports what the outcome of the story is. But if we fast forward to that she's the predecessor of David,
Uh-huh,
but especially in our Orthodox community,
yes.
when someone marries outside of the religion, they actually treat them like the person's dead.
Yeah. And who you refer-
You have a situation where the non-Israelite or whatever is the only reason the whole thing took place.
Right.
So it's a bit of hypocrisy up to and including today.
What's the hypocrisy?
The hypocrisy is the almost statute that you should not marry out of your religion.
And here is a celebration of somebody who did that. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and even Jacob, who married his cousin,
He marries in.
there's nothing in here that says she was a monotheist,
Oh,
because her grandfather was Abraham's brother.
uh-huh.
There's nothing in here that I've read that suggests Abraham's siblings became monotheists.
Yeah, but I think the issue there is less theology than it is community.
Right,
It-
back to my main point.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a lot of hypocrisy up to current day.
So,
In contemporary practice, when a non-Jewish woman converts, she's given the name Ruth.
a convert is often given the name Ruth. Is that what you mean?
Oh, that's contemporary.
Right.
Today.
Look, we ought to say this, that the biblical author, if you had said to the biblical author, 1,000 years from now, we're going to find the rise of a group known as rabbis. And these rabbis are going to have their own way of thinking. And they're not going to like people coming from the outside into the community. There's a suspicion of strangers. And if you said this to those authors, they would not only be incredulous, but they would say, by the way, we also have a premonition of this kind of approach in one of the books that we just finished writing. And that's the book of Ezra. You may remember that when Ezra brings the exiles back from Babylonia, he tells the inhabitants of the land, divorce all of your foreign wives. So there is also, and maybe this is inherent in the human condition in one way or another, a fear of the stranger. The danger, maybe both physical and spiritual, that a stranger can bring into a community. Here's a proposal. Ruth is a polemic against Ezra. That one should not have fear of a stranger inherently, a priori. Because this is a stranger that brought blessing to the community. As a matter of fact, without hers, there's no David. Without David, there's no Solomon. Without David and Solomon, there's no Messiah. I mean, the consequences, the ripple effect of her actions are extremely broad and deep. So this is a celebration of the possibility of the stranger. And especially since she's a Moabite. Now, the relationship between Israel and the Moab went up and down. I mean, there were some good times, there were some difficult times. But one could imagine at that time that the Moabites were on the enemy side of things. And that even enhances the surprise of this book. Not only does a stranger do for the Israelites what non-strangers haven't done, maybe I've stated that badly, but also she comes from an enemy. And so that really raises the question of how absolute should we be in our suspicion of strangers and enemies. Maybe if we see the enemies as human beings as well, in other words, one could go on to say how we might soften that harshness of us versus them, this being an example of the need to examine that harshness. And by the way, the rabbis have a ritual for conversion, and the Bible doesn't know that at all. You become part of a community. You become naturalized by joining the community, right? That's what some of these women do. I mean, Tamar in the Judah and Tamar story, she's a Canaanite, but she works so effectively to help the story of the Israelites move forward because she joins the community. She embraces some of the community norms, certainly the norms of levirate marriage. It's Tamar and not Judah who exhibit the power of levirate marriage. Why does she dress up as a harlot in order to seduce Judah? Because Judah has 3 sons. She marries the first one. That one dies. The second one dies. Judah says, no, I'm not going to give the third one. Why would I? And so the whole notion of carrying on the name and the wealth of your deceased husband, that's the point of levirate marriage, where a widow marries, cohabits with the brother of her deceased husband in order to carry on his name and his patrimony. She does it. It's not only an act of heroism, it's an act of Israelite heroism, because she is not only doing a good thing for the family and putting herself in danger to do it, but she also is following a custom of that community. And by following that custom, she has joined that community. Not necessarily physically, but in terms of wanting to work within the values of that community. And that, rather than a religious transformation or some kind of a conversion, is how joining a community happened in biblical days. So the whole rabbinic idea really can't be read back into this story. So let's go on a little bit. So, verse 2. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Benjamin in Judah. They came to the country of Moab, and they remained there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Look how fast the author is moving the plot along. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women. I mean, one could see the sun setting on the durability of this family. This family is really disappearing. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women. Oh dear, really? That's going to be trouble. And they're living in Moab. So it's likely that if things will go as predicted, they're going to embrace the mores, customs, maybe even the religion of the Moabites. One was named Orpah, which means, the word means back of the neck. And the other, Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years, okay? So they're not just there for 2 weeks. They're there for a long, long time, and it's looking more and more permanent. Then those 2, Machlon and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. My gosh, things look really dire for her. She's in a foreign land. All the men in her life have died. She's left with 2 companions who happen to be the less socially powerful gender, women. And they happen to be Moabite women. So Naomi is in as terrible shape, and there's a famine in her homeland, as terrible shape as anybody could be, and the author accomplished this in 5 sentences, all of this. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. For in the country of Moab she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Okay, so let's graph what is going on here. Things have gone downhill for Naomi in all the ways in which I just reviewed. Things are dire. And the curve is descending ever rapidly. And there's a little bit of a turn upward now. She had heard that that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Okay? I think this is only one of two places in this entire book where God is represented as acting. Otherwise, God is appealed to by the players. They act in godly ways, but God is really not a player in this unfolding drama. This, rather than being the story of God's role in the life of his people, it's the story of the people acting out the values that have been given to them by God. God recedes, but that doesn't mean it turns into a secular society. It's a religious society because they're acting in the name of God. So the author, I'd like to think that the author is being deliberate here. He's trying to show us how to live a godly life. And the more God is an actor in the story, the less the people's godliness can emerge dramatically. Okay? So she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. And if we imagine that the idea of famine has two meanings, food and something about the nature of things in the society, just as the tragedy is beginning to turn toward resolution in terms of food, the famine concept, part one, so we might expect the other notion of famine to turn as well. And we're going to see if that's happening. Accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you to her mother's house." Okay, so this is a little bit puzzling, the mother's house. And we see this occurring in other stories. So, for example, when Abraham's assistant goes to find a wife for Isaac, and they find Rebekah, and then there's this drama inside Rebekah's house. Should she go? And Laban, her brother, continues to hold her back. There's a reference to her mother's house in that story. Also in the Song of Songs, when the woman embraces the man, she says, "Let's go to my mother's house." We don't know exactly what that means. One interesting speculation is it's often used at a point when marriages are about to take place. And so there's a reference in those, for whatever reason, to one's mother's house. Here we find it as well. Look, maybe this is a woman's story. This is the women. And therefore, it's natural to refer not to father's house, but mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, and the word here is chesed. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Okay? It's obvious how they're kind to her. They're accompanying her. How they're kind to the dead remains to be seen. How are you kind to a dead person? Okay? Notice, I think this is one of the most astonishing verses in the Bible. Let's see if I can make good on that excessive claim. Turn back, I'm going back to the beginning. Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Who is the model for whom? We think of God as the model for us. As God clothed the dead, so should we clothe the dead. As God buried the dead, Moses, so should we bury the dead. As God clothed the naked, Adam and Eve, so should we clothe the naked. That famous midrash where imitatio Dei, the imitation of God, becomes a norm. where God is the guide and we're supposed to imitate God. Here it's the reverse. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead. May God take you as his model. And that's a pretty high compliment to Ruth and Orpah. So once again, I mean, the tables are turned here. God is not much of an actor in this story, but the people act in God's name in a godly way. Just as here, God is not the model for kindness, it's these women. It's not the men, it's the women. It's not the Israelite women, it's the Moabite women. God should take God's cues from these women. Now, that's pretty potent. Also, the word chesed. So, chesed means a variety of things. It can mean love, it can mean loyalty, it can mean kindness. Here, the translation likes kindness. Well, let's think about this for a minute. Kindness cannot be legislated. If I'm not kind to you, no court can find me guilty. So this raises the question about, so let me back up. There's a very important concept in rabbinic law, in Hebrew, lifni meshurat hadin, which can be translated in one of two ways, and in those two ways is the controversy about what it means. It can be translated working within the letter of the law or working beyond the letter of the law. Both are plausible interpretations. What is kindness? Kindness doesn't fall in the category of law. So in some sense, acting kindly is working beyond or within the letter of the law. Law can't embrace all good or normative activities. The question is, these normative activities, are they included in the meaning of the law? Is there only halakha, which embraces both law and ethical norms? Or is kindness beyond the letter of the law? That is, Jewish law, halakha, doesn't embrace some of these ethical norms, but we might find it somewhere else, like natural law. Is there a natural law in the Jewish tradition independent of halakha? Or is everything that we might include under natural law contained within halakha? This is a big controversy. There's a very famous essay, I wrote down the title because it's hard to remember, by a rabbi whose name is Aharon Lichtenstein. And here's the essay's title. Does Jewish tradition recognize an ethic independent of halakha? And I'm now reading a very interesting book on, among other things, this question and the variety of answers that Jewish sages, scholars, have given to it. And that's a question here, actually. What's the origin of this notion of kindness? Does it come out of the Jewish tradition? Or does it significantly come from outside the Jewish tradition? In other words, to how many domains does a Jew, let's just put it this way, need to be devoted to? Jewish law only, which can embrace some non-judicable ideas like kindness? Or do we find it outside of Jewish law and it's brought in by natural law? So this idea of kindness here is really a powerful notion, isn't it? Because no court can demand kindness or punish us for being unkind. So it's a notion that in some way extends beyond law. And therefore points to something in human nature which either follows it because one is taught that way or finds it outside. So let's go back. Turn back, middle of verse 8, each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant each of you to find security in the house of a husband. Okay? Now that's going to be pretty clear in Orpah's. She's going back. She's, we imagine, going to find security with a husband. How is Ruth going to find this security? Because she's going into a foreign land, the land of an enemy. And she kissed them farewell. Notice that she initiates the kissing. She kisses them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." It's not a return for us. We're going with you in your return. So, notice that both Ruth and Orpah, the two women, are praised in a very high way. They're ready to stay with Naomi. And this is part of the kindness. This woman, foreign woman, in an enemy territory, they don't want to leave her to her own devices. Well, and it's not just Ruth who does this. What I especially like about what's happening here is Ruth is going to be elevated in stature, in moral stature. And there are two ways of doing this, I might say, in this story. You can elevate her by diminishing Orpah. You want to know how great Ruth is? Look at how unlike Orpah she is. That's one way of doing it. That's not the way the author does it. The author starts by considering Orpah to be deeply virtuous as well. And what Orpah finally does is follows Naomi's advice, and she does what any common morality would understand. So in order to elevate Ruth, the author doesn't denigrate Orpah. The author praises Orpah all the more to elevate Ruth, which I like very much, because oftentimes when we want to praise somebody, we say, well, he's not or she's not like this person. The author doesn't take that easy path. And here again, I think the sensitivity of the author is displaying itself over and over and over again. And therefore, this is a conclusion I draw, we can trust this author. We can follow this author as he or she takes us further and further into this narrative, and follow meticulously what the author is up to. Because the author has taken pains, and we see it, to measure every single word and sentence before writing it. I'm going to stop before I go too far with that. And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping, and they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body?" So notice the implication of the levirate marriage idea. Because she's assuming that these daughters are staying with her because they feel the levirate obligation. The widow has an obligation to cohabit with her deceased husband's brother. And so now, if that's why they're going back, there has to be a brother of the husband's. And there isn't a brother yet. And there will be a brother only if Naomi gets pregnant and has another child. So the assumption is based on a monstrous premise, which she exposes, that you're going to wait for me to have birth. So here's what she says. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Look, you might think that I'm pregnant, and within 15 years, you might be able to cohabit with them. Maybe that's what you think. Turn back, my daughters, for I'm too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight, and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? If I'm already pregnant, it's easily 15 years. If I'm not even married yet, and therefore I'm a long way from getting pregnant, this could be 20, 25 years. Hey kids, what you're doing here has no plausibility to it. Thank you very much. But I just want to point out to you how improbable your motive, or my understanding of your motive, is. Okay? So, to have that motive would be laudable. And we could use it to praise Ruth and Naomi, Ruth and Orpah. Since it's very improbable, and therefore really could not be their main motivation, is the implication, there must be another reason why they are suggesting that they go back with Naomi. Okay? Should you, on verse 13 in the middle, on their account debar yourselves from marriage? So, Naomi is thinking about their well-being. Remember Aristotle's definition, mutual well-being as a feature of friendship. Okay? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. This is an echo of who in the Bible? The hand of the Lord has struck out against me. Job. So Naomi becomes a Job figure to whom injustice has been perpetrated on her. What did I do wrong? That's a very Jobian question. And my sons, Job says, are taken as well from me. My daughters-in-law are taken as well as my sons, Naomi is saying. I want to read a comment to you, which I just read this morning, in a wonderful commentary on Ruth by Edward Campbell. This is from the Anchor Bible series. And the series is maybe 50 years old. And we're getting to new volumes. There was a Genesis commentary by Ephraim Spicer, a great commentary. And 10 years ago or so, another Genesis commentary was printed by this Anchor Bible series. So each generation now is spawning another version of the commentary. And here's what this guy says about what Naomi has just said. And he's quoting, Campbell is quoting P.K. McCarter, who's also a very powerful commentator. McCarter's concluding point is significant. Not only is complaint tolerated by God, but it can even be the proper is italicized, but it can even be the proper stance of a person who takes God seriously. I want to read that again. McCarter's concluding point is significant. Not only is complaint tolerated by God, but it can even be the proper stance of a person who takes God seriously. Anyone who ascribes full sovereignty to a just and merciful God may expect to encounter the problem of theodicy, God's justice. And to wrestle with that problem is no sin. You see the point here? If you're taking God seriously, then the so-called injustices and the traumas in the world need also to be taken seriously if you're acknowledging God as sovereign. And to wrestle with that problem is no sin, even when it leads to an attempt to put God on trial. Petulant Jonah, earnest Jeremiah, persistent Job, Naomi stands in their company. Don't you love it? I'm going to read that again. Petulant, these are the ones who complain. Petulant, then these are heroes. Petulant Jonah, earnest Jeremiah, persistent Job. Naomi stands in their company. I love that quote. So the author is able to say something really powerful about Naomi. Verse 14, they broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell. Notice at first it was Naomi who kissed the girls. Now we have one of the girls kissing Naomi. The first is a kiss of affection. The second is a kiss of goodbye. Now Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. And in the Hebrew, this is a key line, isn't it? In the Hebrew, we've talked about this before. In Hebrew syntax, the verb often comes first and then the noun. When it's reversed, the author, we can imagine, and scholars feel this way, that the author is trying to tell us something that may not occur to us, that there's something very significant. Pay attention when I tell you the noun before the verb. And the Hebrew is Verut and Ruth davka ba. Ruth clung to her. Okay? So, as great as Orpah is, Ruth is even greater, is the idea. So she said, see, your sister-in-law's returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, this is the famous set of lines, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. And this commentator makes a very interesting point. There's only one place in the entire book of Ruth where Ruth uses the personal name of God. Otherwise, she's always using the generic word. Adonai, personal, Elohim, generic. And it comes in verse 17. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord, Adonai, do to me if anything but death parts me from you. And this commentator makes the following comment to this. This is where Ruth joins the community permanently. Your God, not just God, your God. Okay? I think it's worthwhile to go back and to parse each of these phrases. Let's decide what it means. So, verse 16. But Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Okay? Let's suppose these are statements of loyalty, which is another meaning of the word chesed. And no law court can call me in if I'm not loyal to you. This is extra special virtue. So to whom is she loyal here? For wherever you go, I will go. To Naomi, right? Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. What does that add to the first clause?
I'll be right there with you.
I'll be right there with you.
And community,
Joining community, where you lodge, okay? That's a more settled, wherever you go, going is movement, lodging is settledness. Your people shall be my people. I am joining up with your people. They are now my people. And your God, my God, right? So there's a kind of ascendancy of intensity here. I am now leaving my religion and joining your religion. I'm loyal to you. I'm loyal to you in a permanent way. I'm loyal to your people who are now my people, and I'm loyal to your God who is my God. So we see the arc moving upward. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So, forever. True? Thus and more may the Lord do to me if anything but death parts me from you. Okay. So, one could try to infer a life after death idea. If anything but death parts me from you, I'll be with you even after death. But I think that's not what is going on here. How do I know? But it looks like it's just a kind of hyperbolic statement of nothing can separate us. Nothing will be adverse enough from the beginning to the very end. And when Naomi saw how determined she was, so the verb here is the reflexive form of to be strong. And the reflexive form of to be strong is to strengthen oneself. And that's determination, right? Is a commitment to being sure that I am strong even as the adversive waters pour over me, okay? So when Naomi saw how determined she was, V'tera, when she saw ki mit ametzet, that's the reflexive form of the verb. How determined, how much she had strengthened herself, she ceased to argue with her. Okay? So, this nobody from the Moabite people who just happened to marry one of her sons is now showing Naomi it's not going to be worth arguing with me because I have fixed my determination on following you. And the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" And she says, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant. Don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara. You remember maror in the Passover Seder, the bitter herbs? Don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. For Shaddai, one of the names of God, has made my lot very bitter. It doesn't take her but a few sentences to accomplish what it takes Job 30 verses, 30 chapters to accomplish. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. That's famine talk, isn't it? I went away full, and now I am empty. Or, the famine has now become a deep component of who I am. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me? So she comes back home with this deep bitterness, which is part of the famine that is now her lot. Okay? She went away with a husband and 2 sons, and she's come back with nothing. Naomi, there's not nothing. You have this Moabite girl. Okay, I come back with almost nothing. I come back with Ruth. She's loyal to me, but who is she? Now, she's been determined to come back, but how much role can she play in my life? Thus Naomi returned, verse 22, from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. That's said over and over again, the Moabite. Ruth is still seen as a foreigner. They don't know that she's no longer a foreigner, but she constantly is dealt with that way. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley's harvest. Why the heck does the author say that? It does, in a way, round the circle. It finishes the circle, right? They left in a famine, they come back, it's barley. But don't you think that the author is also telling us how wrong Naomi is? That the spiritual communal famine which she is experiencing and for which she is bitter, and justifiably bitter, is also about to end. Because Ruth is the end of the famine. The famine of the end of her family line is going to be, the antidote is, hey, you got Ruth with you? Yeah, I know, she's just a Moabite. No, she's not just a Moabite. She's the resource for the plenty that is going to come to her. Don't you think this is an amazing chapter? Literary and full of ideas and depth. You had a comment, I'm sorry. A question?
I already passed on it.
Okay.
It was more of an emotional famine, not a physical.
Good. That's well put. I think that's right. A different kind of famine has been at work in Naomi's life, and it's got emotional valence as well as physical valence too, but it's not like barley. It's going to be children. It's going to be King David by prediction. Did you have a comment, Nada?
Exactly that she lost her family. That's her family. That's not lack of food, that's lack of sustenance.
Right. And Ruth is the antidote. Right. And in a certain sense, ancient Israelite law is a kind of antidote. It's something to reckon with, because Ruth evidently, just like Tamar back in Genesis 38, felt the obligation of levirate marriage, right? So that may be part of Ruth's motivation. It's not clear that it's ever been told to her, although it's implied in those verses where Naomi says, I'm not pregnant and I won't be pregnant, implying that you feel obligated to that next child. That's Naomi, not necessarily Ruth. You made a?
Are we reading into this that the sons died of famine, or we have no information?
Right.
So it could be they died of a plague,
Right.
but nothing's mentioned. All we know is that she is now deprived of good men in her life.
Right.
And that to me is a different kind of famine.
Oh, for Naomi.
For Naomi,
Oh, definitely. I think it's a good point. The theme of famine manifests itself in this chapter in a variety of ways, and not just the literal way of the barley. In a way, the author may be winking at us with this last verse. Do you think everything is, you think the story is now rounded off with the barley harvest? Haven't you been paying attention to the different kinds of famine that I've been describing to you in this chapter? Yeah. Jordan?
The emotional famine is also ended because she's back in her community. She's been gone for 10 years, a stranger in a strange land, and now she's back in her community.
Right.
So it's not only the body, but the community.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the themes, that Ruth has joined the community, and now she's gone with Naomi and returning to the community. And it raises an interesting question. It's clear that Naomi has returned. I think it says at some points, I should look this up. Has Ruth returned as well? In some literal way, no. She never left Bethlehem. But in some sense, Ruth is going home. She's going to where her destiny has called her. And in that sense, there is a kind of return. I'm not totally convinced by this myself. But
Because it's who you're with, not where you go.
it's true, but if you're with somebody who has returned home and you are committed to her, You have now embraced the norms of home. And in that sense, return doesn't exactly work, but there's this notion, I think it's begun with Spinoza, of amor fati, which means to love your fate, to fall in love with your destiny. Don't fight what's happening to you. Think of it as your destiny and embrace it. Is this Ruth's fate? No, in a literal sense, but maybe yes in a deeper sense. She recognizes what her vocation is, what her life means. For the first time, I'm going to go way out on a limb here. For the first time, Ruth sees what her life really is about, and she's embraced it. And in the embrace is some notion of returning to that which was always hers. I love the poetry of what I'm saying. I'm not sure I get the meaning of it. Anyhow, yeah, Candy?
Do you believe in Beshert?
I don't believe in Beshert in a causal sense, that somehow some force is after me, is pulling me. I do believe it, though, in the sense of we come into this world with certain capacities, and part of growing up, I might say, is to recognize what our capacities are, which is our capacities call out to us, and to be called is to find one's vocation. And in some sense, I mean, I still believe in free will. I mean, we can do other than what we're called to do. But I think part of what real fulfillment is to discover what you were meant to be and cultivate it.
That's what Ruth and Naomi are doing.
But they're not, Beshert often has the idea that somehow the universe has told us what it is we were meant to be. There's this little myth about in the shtetl when a girl and a boy and two different families are born, and the families would like to see them get married one day, that two trees are planted, one for the girl, one for the boy, little saplings. And when they do marry, those trees are cut down and form the branches of their chuppah. That's the idea of not realizing your capacity, but some external force working on you. But it's not that I don't believe in destiny. I don't know. Nada?
I'm reading into this, and I know I am, but my sense is that the man to whom Ruth was married was also a Jew, or had the same God as his mother, and must have talked about it, and therefore she was already somewhat comfortable with this idea, and then it was very easy, or much easier, for her to move on with Naomi.
That's an interesting point. That Machlon or Chilion, her husband, were they married? They were there for 10 years. Were they married for 10 years? I don't know. But I think you raise an interesting point. The seeds were already planted. She already had joined the family. I think it's plausible, though I must say, I think it compromises the poetry of the choice made. In a way, what you're saying is that the choice was hers, but it had already been fertilized, and therefore that diminishes somehow the power of the choice. No, I think you're raising an interesting point here. Yeah. Please, your name?
Michael, nice to meet you. I'm with my grandma here.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. So could we also potentially see it as a death of an ego?
Death of?
An ego. In order to essentially embellish this journey that we are supposed to be on.
The death of Ruth's ego,
Correct. In
she's
order
kind of
to-
subordinating herself to Naomi now. Is that what you're suggesting? But what about the word determined? She was determined to go. That seems to be the elevation of ego. And your question raises an interesting point. How, Eric Erickson talks about the different stages of maturation, doesn't he? And the top one is a fully integrated personality, something like that. Where would Naomi be on that scale? I think the biblical author wants to say way up there at the top. Because in spite of all the adverse circumstances that she's facing, she's determined to go. In a way in which Mavis' point diminishes at that moment. It's not that she wasn't prepared, I think it's a good point, but Orpah, who was not denigrated in this story, does what the conventionally right thing, and we can't blame her for it. Ruth could have done it too if, I don't know how to finish that, if she were weaker or more conventional, but she's conventional and not weaker. Not as conventional, which is an okay thing. But Ruth transcends convention by being determined to do something. So I see your point in a way that Ruth is now devoted to something other than what she has been.
Correct.
And that way may give up something of her own path.
Because she's changed her own in order to conform to another.
You know, that could be called, not in a legal sense, a conversion. The taking on of another identity. I mean, the rabbis want to say that she actually went through conversion because they can't believe that this wouldn't be done in a way contrary to Jewish law. Which of course is silly, because they're reading back their need into this. But in some sense it is a conversion, but it's a conversion of the heart of the Spirit. Yeah? I like that, Doris.
I'm thinking of the word risk that hasn't been mentioned. And even in a conversion, sincere, wholehearted, supported by community, there's a risk involved. And I think it's fair to think of Ruth risking. I have a choice, go back or stay here in Moab, or to follow this very determined woman. She's going back. I like that part of her because I'm also very determined.
You're saying what Ruth is saying about Naomi.
Exactly.
Naomi's determined, I'm going to be determined. Yeah.
I am determined, and I like that style. I'm taking a risk. Furthermore, I feel a kinship with the tradition she comes from, for the reasons that have been mentioned. There's comfort, you mentioned that word, there's a comfort level, cooking there, so I take a risk.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned risk.
It's not a bad word.
I'm sorry?
It's not a bad word.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I think it enhances the heroism of Ruth.
And you don't see that in the text.
You what?
You don't see that in the text.
You don't see the risk.
Yeah, I mean, the author doesn't seem to lay that out.
That's an interesting point. Why doesn't does the author, assuming that we will get that point? Yeah.
No, because it would be negative to what he's aiming for and what the author is trying to produce.
What's the author aiming for?
The elevation of the spirit of these two people together.
And doesn't risk do that? Doesn't it have?
It enhances that.
It enhances that.
It exists.
So maybe it's implicit, needs to be made explicit, I don't know. Maybe the author doesn't see it. Malcolm?
You started the session talking about friendship
Right.
and the definition or characteristics of friendship. So can we crystallize, can you crystallize what we understand when we're speaking about this relationship, which constitutes friendship, based on that definition?
Very good. Thank you for doing that. So let me read this definition again. Friendship is distinctively, so I'm going to read it, and then I think we're going to ask ourselves, according to these criteria, do we have friendship here, or do we have friendship, or does the definition miss something in the friendship, or is it really not a friendship? A distinctively personal relationship that is grounded in a concern on the part of each friend for the welfare of the other. That seems clearly true about Ruth vis-a-vis Naomi. Is it reciprocated? Does Naomi care about, so let's just put that on the table for a minute. For the other's sake, your people shall be my people, your God, my God. I am deferring to all that's yours. I'm doing it for your sake and not for mine. Does that work? Hold on just a second. So, is it mutual? Is it for the other's sake? And remember what I said at the beginning. It can also have something good for us, but its motivation is for the other, and then involves some degree of intimacy. So what do you think about those? Joan?
I think the definition can also be applied to the word love. And I see love over and Ruth for Naomi as a very strong motivation for going with her.
So Aristotle talks about three different kinds of friendship. Friendships of pleasure, friendships of use, virtue friendships. Certainly friendships of pleasure don't require love, nor do friendships of utility. Are you suggesting, or could we infer, that the highest form of friendship is another way of saying love?
I think love has other elements to it, but I would certainly say that it's part of it.
Are the highest friendships love?
Yes.
Okay.
But
So-
we're reciprocal. The question of
Yeah.
whether these are reciprocal or not, we still haven't addressed.
Okay, so is there reciprocity here?
Well,
Mutual
not-
caring?
It's not obvious to me.
Okay. So you say that criterion, and we don't have to get this definition, but this is a help to us to unpack this question. That doesn't seem to work there. Ruth cares about Naomi at her peril, risking. Does Naomi care about Ruth?
Not trying to agree.
Yeah,
Not-
Absolutely not. I see Naomi
Yeah.
as a teacher. 10 years girls lived with Naomi. And she taught them everything she knew. Maybe cooking, maybe cleaning, and maybe spiritual.
Okay.
And she has to do. One student loved her dearly. It was Ruth. But I don't say, and another one, Orpah, she has her identity. She was not that close to her. She liked her, but she did not love her.
Okay, very good.
And Naomi, not right away, understood Ruth. She accepted her, but she did not appreciate it. It took time. Because when she came and said, I am an unhappy person, I am not Naomi, why she wouldn't say, I am so happy. I had this disciple who converted, and she converted her, by the way. 10 years, it's a long time. It's not one day.
So you're saying that though Ruth is doing a lot for Naomi,
Later.
no, right now, she goes back with her, your people shall be my people, your
Oh, yes, Naomi did not accept her
right away.
Good, good, good. So the arrow, let's say the arrow of activity, Ruth to Naomi, Naomi to Ruth, most of that energy is going from Ruth to Naomi. And though Naomi has taught her, you're implying, and has made there's some socialization going on, it's not, well, what about that? She has helped Ruth to see. Is she giving to Ruth as well as Ruth's giving? Is there reciprocity here? You see reciprocity?
Well, if you read the story,
Yeah.
you get to 3, and Naomi's advising her on how to proceed in this land and how to fulfill her destiny, how to reduce risk to settlement with the exchange of land and so forth.
That's a good point here. So you're saying that as the story proceeds, beyond
Finish the
where we've
story.
ended.
Yes, you get that reciprocity in spades.
Who's it for, though? Naomi,
Well, it's for the family
okay.
and the two women.
Is it for Ruth?
Is it for Ruth?
It's
Well,
in verse 8, with Naomi
she says
saying,
daughter.
for your own good, go back to your mother's house.
Right.
Yes.
She's giving up 10 years of friendship,
But
8
now
years of friendship.
Okay, very good.
But now that she's there, daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy.
Okay, well, very good, very good.
To me, I'm reading that as Naomi looking after her daughter-in-law.
For her daughter's sake.
She has adopted this, I mean, it's interesting also, Ruth is daughter, girl, woman. We're sort of not sure, 10 years, she doesn't have sons. So she is this sort of metaphor for the female counterpart of a family, which is absolutely locks everybody in.
So we have a disagreement here about whether or not there is reciprocity. Some of us say no. You're making a case for yes.
Yes.
Although it emerges only as the story continues.
Well, don't we have to finish the story?
Well, of course. Up to this point. No, we're done. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, yeah. Naomi's doing something for Ruth and also getting something herself. The continuity of her family. The family line is not ended.
Yeah.
So that there is reciprocity, you would want to say, but that doesn't mean that the people giving to the other aren't getting something back by the giving.
I know when you talk about parents and children, you talk about just this kernel between, the difference between Naomi and Orpah and Naomi and Ruth. That's really interesting.
What's the difference?
Well, I feel like there's more there than just mother-daughter between Naomi and Ruth. And I don't know why I feel that.
What do you think the more is?
I don't know, because now we're talking about female relationships, and I don't know if I understand the difference between gender and identity and all of that.
All right, very good. So why don't we just so we have stuff on our calendars for the rest of the day and tomorrow and Monday and Tuesday. Why don't we pause for 10 minutes, each of us get on the phone and cancel so that we can stay here till we get to the bottom of this.
Playoffs.
Agreed.
What's that?
The playoffs are today and tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, forget it. All right, so next week, we're going to keep all these in mind. Is there reciprocity? Is it for the other's sake? Is there intimacy? I mean, in some way, it's an asymmetrical relationship. It's parent and child, mother and daughter. And the asymmetry has something to do with the nature of the relationship as well. So let's continue next week. Your assignment is finish the book of Ruth. Let's do that. I think we need to read every single thing. but I think we want to read the chapter carefully, and we'll continue next week. Shabbat shalom.
She has 2 sons, 2 daughter-in-laws, and they're married. And neither girl is pregnant before the husband dies. Don't you find that convenient to the story?
I think you put your finger on it. I mean, this is an author. I mean, obviously, in any narrative, certain things are left out.
Right.
The question is, are they left out because the author hasn't thought it through, or are they left out because the author knows what the author's up to?
Maybe they couldn't get pregnant because there was something wrong with the sons, and that's what killed them.
That's possible. Yeah. But the author doesn't care about that question.
It's irrelevant to the story.
It's irrelevant. If had I been writing the story, I might have gone down that path because I may not have had my finger on where I want to go. Yeah.
Just keep going.
That's yeah, 1 foot in front of the other.
Now, isn't this the second time around the Moabites have helped us out?
When's the first time?
Jethro.
Interesting. Is Jethro a Moabite?
I believe so.
How good.
Moses' wife was the Moabite.
Let's take a look at this. So what are we talking about? Exodus chapter
Jethro was,
18.
Moses' counselor, and a good one.
Yeah. No, there's no question that Jethro is true. Oh, there's no question about that. The question is he a Moabite? 'Cause, well, let's see. Jethro, the priest of Midian. Midian.
Wasn't Midian where the Moabites were?
Well, that's the question. There's also Balak in the story of Balaam.
Yeah.
And Balak is, what is this, chapter 22. Right. Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was numerous. Moab is dreaded. Moab, Balak, son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab. But now Balak is a bad guy in this story. He calls Bilam, and Bilam is, if we can find that Bilam was a Moabite, that would help your point. So you think Jethro we didn't read everything about Jethro.
Jethro was the chieftain of that area, wherever they were.
Right.
And he had the daughters, and that's how he became Moses' father.
He did.
But he also helped out. What I'm saying is, it's the second time around. The Moabites.
Is he a Moabite, though?
I thought he was.
I don't think the story says so. But let's take a look. Let's look at that. So we're looking at Jethro and we're looking at Bilam. Too. And Bilam is Numbers 22 and 23. Well, I'll take a look. We could definitely Google knows, that's for sure. What's this? Oh. Did you pay? No. Oh, I see. Okay, very good. Thanks. That was good. No, don't be. I saw it, but I haven't read it yet. You're just giving me some information.
Yes.
Good. And we're on for next Friday night.
Yes.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call you near the end of the service.
Okay.
Right before I do the kiddush, something like that.
Fine.
Looking forward to it.
Just alert me if you're saying something that make me jump.
Okay, very good. And it was great to see Zoya here.
Yes.
Zoya has opinions.
Oh yes, and very strong.
Oh, yes, I know that. You're welcome. Michael?
Yes, I appreciate it.
So, I love your grandmother.
Yes.
Where do you
Most
live?
do.
Yeah. Where do you live?
I'm over like Fairmount Circle area.
Oh, you're here. Good. What do you do?
So, Goodyear Tire Company, I work for the racing and motorsports company. Yes. Very realistic, it's very in-depth position.
How
So
much
that
is that? Where